Welcome to the Sincerely God podcast. I'm Sarah, and I believe that God is speaking to all of us all the time and in many different ways. The primary way that I listen is through two-way journaling. And on this podcast, I share excerpts from my journaling time with God, which are really inspirational messages spoken from the perspective of God to you. I'll talk more about what two-way journaling is and explore other methods which may be helpful for you to listen to God in your own unique way. I'm just an ordinary person who gets to hear from an extraordinary God, and I believe you can too. Thanks for joining. Hi everyone. So I'm excited for today because I'm actually going to take some time to share a little bit of my backstory, a little bit about who I am and kind of just what my life journey has looked like. I know I've shared little tidbits kind of as we go, but I want to actually share, I want to do an episode about one of the ways that I hear from God that is a little unique. And I feel like in order for me to do it justice, I think you need the context of kind of where it began. And in order to do that, I felt like it was best for me to share a little bit more about just me. I appreciate you, all of you who have been watching, listening, whether it's just catching the clips on social media or actually tuning into the whole podcast. I just so appreciate your support. I appreciate that you are taking the time to maybe get, I'm hoping that there are nuggets that are helpful for you. There's been so much that God has shared with me that has been hugely helpful for me in my life journey. And so that's my hope, is that not only that you can receive some of those pieces of insight and just encouragement that will help you in your own life, but also to inspire you and to give you even practical ways that you can better tune into how God is already speaking to you. That's my biggest thing. It's not about listening to me talk, right? Like, I'm sharing because I want you to be able to have an example. I think in my own life, there's been so many, whether it's reading books or listening to podcasts or other things, where hearing other people's stories and how they experience God, how they grow, how they practically hear and live out this journey with God, like, that's been so helpful for me. It's been inspirational. It's given me hope for things, but it's also giving me just practical understanding. Sometimes we talk about things in such a generic, or I don't know, just a way that you can't grasp it, right? And hearing actual examples of people's stories and how God speaks in their everyday life, that gives me something that I can hold on to. And even if it doesn't look the same way in my own life, it's giving me something tangible that I can have like as a starting point, even like just like a building block, so to speak, for my own life. So that's my hope, obviously, with this podcast, is for you to be able to tune into those ways that God is already speaking to you. And that's also part of why I did the eCourse. If that's something that you just want a little bit more support in, you want to go a little deeper, have more practical explanation tools, even practical activities that you can try on your own, the eCourse, Discovering the Ways that God is Speaking to You, could be really helpful. I'm certainly not the only one that has shared this type of advice or tips, but it is obviously my own unique spin, really just based on my own personal journey of all the things that have been helpful for me. So there's aspects in there that I've pulled from other resources that just have been really foundational in my journey, my growing. So I recommend you check that out. You can just go to really any of my links, and there should be an easy way to find that eCourse. But okay, so I want to talk a little bit about me. And this is obviously different than what I normally do on this podcast. I probably won't be sharing any excerpts today, but I feel like it's good for you to maybe get to know me a little bit more. So I obviously born and raised in America, in a small town in California, and I was raised in a Christian home. I grew up kind of going to church as a little kid. It was a very small church, small town, small church. And so I think I've always believed that God exists, but my personal connection, relationship, and understanding of God has varied quite a bit throughout my life. And so I'm sure as a kid, I had a version of that relationship with God, right? I would pray. I did the typical accept Christ as your Lord and Savior, get baptized, all of that kind of thing I did as a kid. But my relationship with God at that time was minimal. I mean, compared to what I'm looking at compared to now, I think maybe at the time it was the best I could do, but it looked very different than how I would describe my relationship now. So, typical Western, culture, I think, experience of growing up, probably some unique things being in a small town, but, as a teenager, I was no longer forced to go to church, so I didn't go to church. And then when I went to college, I actually went to a Christian college. And the main reason I did that was honestly because I went to such a small high school that I knew I wouldn't be able to handle going to like a normal sized university. And so it was less about finding a Christian culture and more about just finding something small or, reasonably sized, so I didn't have too much of an overwhelm. And when I was at that college, they had what they called chapel 3 times a week, and it was obviously geared more towards that age group. I grew up in a small town. The church that I went to probably had like 100 people in attendance. Obviously, the pastor wasn't like the best teacher speaker and was, relating his messages directly to me. So being in that environment where it was, I think, really, geared toward a person my age, it was more helpful for me to I guess, get something out of it. And so I think also in that period of time, right, as a young adult, there's a lot of just exploring, growing, becoming, who you are as a person. So in that time, I kind of started, I would say, to seek again, and even started attending church on the weekends, aside from the required chapel as part of going to school. So it kind of started back on that journey. But again, I wouldn't say that I had a super close connection with God. Again, I always believed that God was good, believed that God existed, but how to hear from him, how to like really connect, that didn't really exist at that time. Then I got married out of college, and I had always had an issue, but I didn't realize the extent of the issue until after I got married. I had chronic pelvic pain, and I'll try to spare you all of the details, but it had a big impact on my marriage, and it kind of got worse. It got worse over time. I went on just a journey trying to figure out what was even wrong, and that was difficult. And I probably at some point will share maybe a little bit more details on that, but I can get a little on my soapbox about the patriarchal medical system that we have, and honestly just the culture of how there's a lot of things, not only just in, call it American culture in general, but really in the church culture, that had a lot of negative impacts on me as a female that I'm even now still unraveling. It's been a journey. But all that being said, I finally found a correct diagnosis, well, at least part of a diagnosis. I was diagnosed with hypertonic pelvic floor muscle dysfunction, which is a mouthful, but the best description I think I read it in a book. It was described as, let's say you make a fist and hold it like that, as tight as you can for days, weeks, months, years. Even when you release it, you're going to have a lot of pain. And that's basically my pelvic floor muscles. We're in this like chronically tight, tense, and a lot of things were out of balance. I had postural issues, things that were contributing. So I started doing pelvic floor physical therapy, and that had some help, but I had to go on medication because my nervous system, like if you know anything about chronic pain, acute pain is one thing where if it only lasts a certain period of time, but once it goes past, I think it's like around 6 weeks or so, it starts to have systemic effects where your nervous system is going to be extra alert. And so I still to this day have issues with my nervous system where I can experience, it's funny, like I'll maybe even get, let's say, I cut my mouth or like have a sore in around one of my teeth, something like that. Something small, not a lot of pain, but I'll have that pain in my mouth. And because of this kind of heightened nervous system, the entire side of my face will be painful to the touch. It's just this, it goes on overdrive basically. So all that being said, even if I had a correct diagnosis, which took me years to get, there wasn't a quick solution. Once you have chronic pain, even if you address the initial cause, you now have all of these other effects that also need to be addressed. There's a lot of emotional, psychological impact, especially in the impact that it had on my marriage. So eventually the impact on my marriage was too severe. My husband at the time, you know, whenever you have troubles in a relationship, it doesn't affect just the one person, it affects both. And I think part of our problem was we both tried to handle the difficulty on our own, as opposed to coming together and being a team that could support each other and kind of attack or address the issue as a team. So a lot of negative things at the end that were also very hurtful. But during that time, so obviously when you're facing a difficult situation, you're trying to find help, you're trying to find hope. And so as I was facing the pelvic pain, as I was facing the difficulties in my marriage, what I did is I tried to go deeper in my relationship with God. I tried to seek help in that way. And I really do feel like my relationship with God was as close as it could be, considering the state that I was in. I think when we go through this life, we tend to build up just layers of false beliefs, whether that's things that people have spoken over you that you internalize, right? Lies that you start to believe, whether that's just what you inherently see in the culture around you, right? Maybe it's not spoken directly to you, but you see it in your parents, you see it in your peers, you see it on TV. There are beliefs that get piled up around us that become almost part of who we are, that become barriers to the truth. And Jesus is the truth. And so being able to have that close, pure connection is difficult when you have all of these layers getting in the way. So all that being said, I believe I grew closer to God. I grew stronger in my kind of beliefs when it comes to faith, but I still had a lot of layers. I still had a lot of difficulty healing trauma that had to be resolved. So all that being said, went through a divorce, and really, I think I would say just leaned full into healing. So I had already been doing so many things trying to address the physical healing. And, you know, my prayers during my marriage would be things like, you know, please heal this pain issue in me, because I felt like so many issues in our marriage, I felt like they stemmed from this. And in hindsight, it was really a lie that I was believing. Like the primary symptom that I had at that time of the pelvic pain was pain during sex. And so it created a lot of turmoil in that area of our relationship. In hindsight, I can see we had so many other issues in our relationship, but at the time, I viewed, okay, all of these issues that I'm seeing, difficulties that I'm experiencing in this relationship, I kind of attributed back to the fact that we didn't have this healthy sexual relationship. And then I viewed the reason for that unhealth because of the pain issue that was contributing. In hindsight, that wasn't it at all. Yes, the pain issue contributed and created challenges, but there were so many other issues. So all that being said, I was in this place of like, God, please heal this, because I want everything else to be healed, right? And then I finally, as time went by and I still wasn't getting better, or I was only getting incrementally better, my prayers turned to like, God, you know, even if this pain issue still continues, heal my marriage just, you know, in spite of it. And ultimately, God's answer to that prayer was to heal me, and that couldn't be done while I was in this unhealthy relationship. And I'm sure there's a lot of different perspectives about divorce. I absolutely believe that God hates divorce. It is not the ultimate design that he intended, but the ultimate design of what he intended is a particular type of relationship. And divorce is hard. It's hurtful. There's a lot of things that a person who goes through a divorce experiences that God never wants that person to experience. But God also never wants that person to experience the unhealth that exists in that broken marriage. And I do believe that there can be healing in a marriage, and even like the worst situation doesn't necessarily have to be the end of that particular relationship, but there is a lot of healing that has to be done, and it's difficult to do that if you're both broken and you don't have, I would say, the right mindset and really ability. I think sometimes we just don't have the ability to heal while we're in that situation. For me, one of the difficulties I had was like, I have fear of failure, perfectionist kind of mentality that has been part of my life since a child that I'm slowly unraveling. But I viewed kind of a failure in my marriage as a failure of myself personally. And I really, in a lot of ways, put my marriage and call it the health of my marriage above my own personal health. I mean, even to the point of I was literally physically enduring trauma and pain because I felt like it was important for me to have sex with my husband, even though it was extremely damaging to me, honestly. The pain issue that I had got so much worse because I was putting myself in a situation to continue to have that pain. But I did that because I didn't want the relationship to fail, right? I valued that above my own personal, really my own self. I valued the relationship above myself. And as long as I'm putting like all of my energy towards healing and saving a relationship over healing myself, I'm not going to heal, right? And so for me, and I'm not saying that this is true for every situation, but for me in my situation, I had to be out of that relationship in order for God to do the level of healing that he needed to do in me, to become a healthy enough version of myself to be able to be in a healthy marriage. And yes, my ex-husband had his own level of healing that he had to go through as well, but that's not my story to tell. So after my divorce, I really just went deeper in really trying to get healthy as a person. And so, yes, I still went after the physical healing, but I also went after the spiritual healing and really started looking even at holistic approaches to ultimately to the physical healing, but through that holistic approach, understanding that there's more to who I am as a human being. So, I've said this before, right? I lived most of my life living out of my mind, viewing my body as a machine that was broken, and not even like acknowledging the fact that I had a heart, a soul, a spirit. Now I view myself as a human being. I think, we were created in the image of God, and if God is triune, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, I think we are also triune in that respect of we are body, right? We're physical, but we're also mind and spirit. And even in that mind aspect, I think our mind, even if you look at certain scriptures in the Bible, there are some words that would be translated as mind or heart or soul. And so I think that when I'm referring to mind, what I'm really referring to is this heart, mind, soul aspect of who we are. So I had to understand that and recognize that and realize that in order for me to be healthy and whole, it's not just about okay, I have a broken body that needs to be fixed. No, all of these aspects of myself need to be healthy, and there needs to be a kind of free-flowing, they all need to be connected, and there needs to be this wholeness amongst them all. And I honestly, I feel like I'm still working on that, right? There's still healing pieces and disconnects that are still being worked on, but I've come a long way. First step is even recognizing that exists. But through that time, I was reading, I was listening to a lot of podcast sermon messages at that time. I mean, I had a church that I was going to that I was certainly growing in and getting practical understanding of, what it means to be a follower of Jesus, to have a connection with God. a pastor that I would listen to a lot that had a lot of practical application that was also very helpful for me is Stephen Furtick from Elevation Church. He's not for everybody, but there were so many things that he shared that were new ways of viewing scripture that I'd never understood. Honestly, the most impactful sermon series probably that I've ever listened to, certainly from him, it was called God's Will is Whatever. It was based on the Colossians verse that says, whatever you do in word or deed, do it in the name of the Lord. And this idea that God's will is so much bigger than we think it is, right? We have a tendency to think like there's this one tiny little pinhole of God's will, and I need to get everything exactly right. And if I choose vanilla ice cream over chocolate ice cream for, dessert today, I'm going to miss that pinhole of God's will. And that's so not true. And it was so freeing for me to recognize that, like, no, sure, there's some broad things that God has designed to be in his will, but he created us with the ability to choose and to even create on our own. And I have a journaling message that he gave me once where he said, like, I didn't give you a paint by numbers kind of life, right? He wants us to explore and make our own decisions and live our lives. And there's so much space to do that within his will. But I was that's not what I was really taught in all of the growing up in the church culture that I was in. So listening to podcasts, I read books like Present Over Perfect, and I also was journaling. I would try to spend time in prayer every day or as often as I could, but I get, we call it like ADD prayer, right? Like it's hard to stay focused if I'm just like praying thoughts in my mind. So I started writing out in a journal my prayers because it helped me to stay like focused. So I really think that time that I spent journaling, like it was like I talk about being still. It was a form of that stillness, and it really set me up to be able to connect with that two-way journaling approach because I'd already been journaling so much. But so I did things. I was involved in my local church, so I was connecting with other people who had similar belief systems that could encourage me and I could share with. And then I also started seeing a holistic physical therapist. So my pelvic floor physical therapist that I've been seeing for years and years recommended this other person because I had seen improvement, but I was hitting a wall. Like I couldn't get past, I couldn't resolve the pain fully. And, I think she recognized that she was a physical therapist. She could address the physical piece, but there's so much more than just that physical piece, right? There's the emotional, there's the spiritual. So I started seeing this holistic physical therapist who actually has her own pelvic pain story that in a lot of ways has similarities to mine. And she actually wrote a book about it. Her name is Mary Ruth Valicki. I think the first book she wrote is Healing Through Chronic Pain. And so I was able to read her story, and through her own journey, so she was already a physical therapist and really, Western medicine mindset, but she went through debilitating pain and couldn't find resolution. And so she started turning to alternate approaches outside of Western medicine and really found significant healing and really from a spiritual perspective. So she now takes this gift of healing and infuses it in her physical therapy practice. So she was doing this holistic physical therapy, I think is what she called it, but I look at it as very spiritual. So I started seeing her, and I was still doing all my other things. It took time, right? It wasn't an immediate, I had like one physical therapy session with her and like, wow, everything got broken through. But there was absolutely changes over time that I could see physically in my body, but they were being enacted through what I think is a spiritual means. So I now think that we are mind, body, spirit. And if you have emotional trauma, if you have even just lies that you've believed about yourself or the way that the world works, or so many things can have an impact on our physical bodies. And, pain is a way of our bodies trying to get our attention. And often our bodies will start in different ways before it even gets to pain. But if we're not listening, we're not taught how to listen, then it gets worse and worse to the point where now you've got debilitating pain and it's impacting all aspects of your life and you need to do something about it, right? You hear stories about people who have chronic illnesses and the illness can be resolved and then they'll have some other chronic illness in the future. And I believe that's because it's not a physical cause. We can have old emotional trauma that has never been fully healed and processed out. It's going to come out some way. Maybe that's through chronic anxiety. Maybe that's through digestive issues. Maybe that's through chronic pain, right? There's all of these different things that if we are a whole being that consists of all these different aspects that are beyond just our physical bodies, if you've got a brokenness, a hurt, a wound in one area, just like if, we can have a physical problem in our body that's going to start having psychological impacts. It's going to start having emotional impacts. It's going to affect other parts of ourselves. And so similarly, if we have an emotional trauma, a wound that hasn't been healed, then it's going to start impacting our physical bodies. So recognizing that who we are is so much more complex, right, than our Western medicine would like us to believe. And there's something wrong, in a sense of Western medicine. I think if you go back to the history, when science first came up, there's so many important things about that we've discovered through science. And I am a big proponent of science, by the way, but I'm just talking from like a historical perspective and how science can be very focused on it has to be like empirical data evidence for everything. And there are some things in this universe that cannot be explained through what we currently know and recognize of empirical evidence. So I think it's a huge component and it's been extremely impactful to, so many things that we can see now that have been eradicated, right? Diseases and things because of scientific discovery, because of the Western medicine approach. But I think there's more, right? So don't do away with that approach, but add to it and recognize that we're not just physical beings, that we also have heart, mind, soul, and we can have wounds and call it diseases in these other areas that are going to impact our physical well-being. And so in order to truly have full health, we need to not only address physical issues, but we need to address these other aspects of who we are. So I got divorced in 2013 and really just started this healing journey of really trying to heal in all these different aspects of who I was, even though at that time I probably couldn't have identified of like, okay, I understand that I have heart that needs to be healed, right? It was doing the best with what I knew at that time and kind of exploring and growing. So over that time, really, it was expanding my understanding, my awareness, but it was also removing these layers, right? And I think there's a conscious approach to that, but there's also so much that really happens subconsciously or even just outside of our minds. I think there are spiritual layers that we don't necessarily need to logically, mentally, consciously be able to define, understand, and do something about, right? We can live in the mystery of the spirit world, the spirit realm, the spirit aspects of ourselves, and connect spirit to spirit or connect heart to heart. And this is where I think this connection with God is so transformational. And so through that time, right, nothing happened overnight, but I was doing all of these different things, and there was this transformational process that was happening within me or around me, where I was removing these layers. And as I removed layers, there was a more pure connection, and I would be able to get to a deeper level of just connection to God. And again, I can't like point to specific, oh, this happened, and then, this transformation occurred. Like so much was gradual over time. There are specific, I would say, milestones or moments along my journey that were impactful that I can point to. And one of those was when I first started experiencing what I would call my first gift of the Spirit. I know that's kind of a Christianese term, but call it a supernatural, right? God moving supernaturally in a way that like I could not deny the supernatural aspect of it. There was no physical explanation to what was happening. And it was a way that God was demonstrating his love for me. And that recognition of, I've described it before, I think, where it's like I went from knowing God loved me to knowing God loved me, right? Knowing intellectually, having a cognitive awareness that God loves me, to, I would say, experiencing it in my entire being. Believing it in my heart is a whole different level than believing it in my mind. And I think about this idea of belief, that, right, there, you could say like you believe something, but there's a difference between believing something and knowing something, right? Like I can say, I believe that I am going to become XYZ someday, or I believe that so-and-so loves me, or this idea is going to come to fruition, whatever I believe. But then there's things that I know. I know the effect of gravity to the point where I don't even think about it. I know that if I, walk along the ground, my feet are going to stay connected to the ground, right? I know it. There's no doubt, like there's no level of, the belief level is 100% in that. But then there's believing things that we can, in a way, have varying degrees. And so it's like, in a way you could say I believed in God and I believed God loved me, but having that supernatural experience, it brought that belief to a new level, that if God would do something supernaturally to benefit me, right? It was a way of physical healing that I was experiencing. Then I knew that he loved me in a way that I'd never known before. And I think in my own personal journey, like there's been levels of that, right? Where even since then, like that was a particular experience. But like when I discovered the two-way journaling and I started recognizing God speaking to me uniquely, specifically in my, blow my mind kind of understanding, that was another layer of God's love for me, like knowing God's love for me. And I think there's just more, right? God's love is greater than we can ever understand or comprehend. And so it's a discovery process of experiencing and knowing that love at higher levels, at deeper levels. I say all that just to, I guess, give some background of, first of all, you may, if you've never met me before, or maybe you've only met me recently, you may think like, oh my gosh, she's super spiritual. She has all of her stuff together. She's never done anything wrong. Like, it's so not true. I have my own life journey, and I've had my own like lies and things that I've had to peel back, these layers of untruths that have been spoken over me or I have experienced in this world, or I've told to myself, that has been this long process and journey of unraveling. And God is a God of process. That is one thing I have absolutely learned. Everything takes so much longer than I think or want it to take. And often it looks different than I want it to look, or I think I want it to look, right? If you go all the way back to when I was in that unhealthy marriage, right? After I went through my divorce, first I had to heal from the divorce. The way that the marriage ended was very hurtful. There was a lot of stuff that I had to heal from. But then once I healed from that, I realized like I had so much to heal from the entire relationship. It was an unhealthy relationship. And I'm not saying that I was not a part of that, right? I'm sure I did stuff to him that he had to heal from, but I'm just saying from my perspective, there was a lot of stuff that I had to heal from. But even beyond that, I have a lifetime of misbeliefs or, lies, things that this culture has put on us, things that I maybe just subconsciously received as a kid, right? That led me to have certain beliefs about myself, as myself as a person, as myself as a woman. And I'm still healing from that. Honestly, there are still things that God is bringing up and unraveling and bringing healing and wholeness to that I'm sure go all the way back to when I was a kid. So there was so much healing that had to take place, and I was going somewhere with that. So going back to that broken marriage, right? When I was in that marriage, what was I praying for? I was praying for that marriage to work. I was praying for physical healing in that, immediate and healing of that relationship and to stay in that marriage. But what God gave me was a level of personal healing that I never could have experienced while being in that relationship. And it's been such a journey. Like, I can't imagine my ex-husband having to sit and wait for me to get healthy. It's been over a decade that this healing process has been taking place. So I guess I just say that as, like, your story is different than mine, but you have your own story, you have your own journey, and it's going to be a process, and there's going to be ups and downs, and you have stuff that needs to be unraveled, and you have things that God is not done with you yet. He's not done healing. He's not done unraveling. And I don't think really will ever be done, that there's so much. And even as we're healing from old things, new things happen to us, right? We still live in this broken world. We still have hard things that happen to us. And so I just want to encourage you that when you see someone's highlight reel, when you see who they are today, know that there's been a hard journey to get there. Know that there's more there than you can see in just that highlight reel. And give yourself grace, because I know I do this. I see somebody and I'm just like, wow, they have it all together. Like, it's amazing that they can do X, Y, and Z, that they show God's love in that way, whatever it may be, but I don't know their whole journey. And I can discount who I am now and what I've been through if I'm comparing to the other person. So I guess I just want to encourage you in that. Recognize that you have a beautiful story and God has so much more for you. And there's healing maybe that you haven't walked through yet. And I will say that healing process is hard. It takes work and it takes facing uncomfortable things, right? Often we can sweep things under the rug instead of dealing with them. It's because it's hard. It's uncomfortable. There's a lot, even stuff like things about ourselves that we don't want to face, that, I act a particular way. Well, what's the root of that, right? What's underneath that? Why do you act that particular way? So it's hard, but if you don't address it, if you're not willing to go through that hard and that discomfort, it's only going to build, and it will have an impact to you. Maybe it's going to be an impact in relationships where you can never be close to people, whether that's friendships or romantic relationships, because you never get to a point of being able to trust someone. Maybe it's you can never trust yourself, right? You have believed a lie that you're not enough. That's been one of my own lies, of believing that I'm not enough. And when you believe that enough, you put that belief into the world around you, and it's going to impact how you relate to everyone, how you relate even to things that you do, a job that you have, whatever it may be. It's going to have an impact. And so as you are willing, and God will walk you through that. I think that's the biggest thing, is you've got to do it with God, because He's going to give you what you can handle at that point in time. There's layers. I talk about this with friends where it's, sometimes we can feel like we're coming back to the same thing over and over again, and we're thinking, didn't I already address this? But there's a deeper level. There's a higher level, right? That you can't take the whole thing all at once. It's too much. We've built walls in our lives, in ourselves, that are protective walls they were built for a reason, right? Especially if you think of things that happens in childhood. There's stuff that you need to do to survive. And you can't just bulldoze every single wall all at once. Like, it's a process, and God knows what you're ready for. And so you may be able to chip away at that first wall, but now there's another one behind it. And so just don't get discouraged, I think, when you seem to be coming back to some of the same issues. Try to take a step back and recognize, okay, is it the exact same issue, and am I at it at the exact same level? Or am I approaching it a little different, right? Do I have an awareness that I didn't have before? Am I able to take the next step because of what I've already healed from, or I've already grown through? So give yourself grace. Give yourself grace. Be willing to do the work. And what is on the other side is so worth it. And I'm still not on the other side, but I can look at where my life is today, who I am as a person, how I relate to myself, how I relate to people around me, the quality of the friendships that I have now versus 10 plus years ago are so dramatically different. Like, my life is so dramatically different, and it's been work, and I've had a lot of hard things, and I know my heart is different. We can't compare but I'm just saying it's been a journey. It has not always been fun or easy, but it's been worth it. It has been worth it. And I am willing to keep on this journey and trusting God with whatever the next thing is. Even though, don't get me wrong, like I'm constantly with God, like, why are you making me do this? This is too hard. Help me through this. Can't there be another way? Like, I'm still going to him and needing that help and encouragement. Why do you think I have all of these journaling words, right? Because I'm constantly going to God saying, I can't handle this today. Help me in this moment. And he's giving me that encouragement. So that's another reason why I just encourage you to discover those ways that God is already speaking to you, because this life is hard and you need that encouragement. Not only do you need the discernment, the wisdom, the revelation, but you need that encouragement. Every day, every step, you need that encouragement, and he'll give it to you. He's already trying to give it to you, but do you see? Do you recognize? Are you hearing the ways that he's speaking to you? So I don't know that I had a particular path that I was planning on going. I wanted to just kind of share more about me, about my journey. I think there's so much more that I could share. I have so many stories of just specific things that God did, ways that he moved in my life, aspects of that healing journey. I do want to share more in the future. I mean, obviously my focus is really this being able to recognize God's voice in your own life and receive that encouragement, inspiration from what he has shared with me. But I'd also like to share a little bit about my healing journey, because I think we all need healing. Even if you have no physical issues whatsoever, I bet you need some emotional healing. I bet there's some things that are impacting thoughts about yourself that could use some healing. So probably I'll share some more at some point in the future. And then I will do an episode soon that I'll talk about what is that supernatural way that I first experienced God's love, and how has that been an impactful part of not only my healing, but also a way that God actually speaks to me or communicates to me. So thanks for hanging in, listening to my rambling. And I hope maybe there's a little bit of encouragement in there just on your own journey, that it may not look the way you expected. It may be longer and harder and more of a process than you were hoping for, but it is worth it. Keep on that journey and keep seeking God in your own unique way. Thanks for tuning in to the Sincerely God podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe and share with your friends. If you'd like more information, you can go to my website, sincerelygod.com. There you'll find links to my social media, as well as an ability to get your own copy of Sincerely God, a collection of quotes, either the book or the prayer journal. Until next time, keep listening to how God is speaking to you.
It's all inside you, waiting to